Sure, and it's really great to be here. Thanks for the invite. Yeah, so I'm a captain with Lone Pine Fire, and our unit originally was called up for the for the Inyo Mono Task Force to head to the Eaton Fire, which at the time had just sparked up on the back end of the Palisades Fire. So that's a task force basically would be like, a certain number of engines, water tenders, and a group that was set up to do this. So we do have a task force, but we were actually assigned as a single resource to head to Palisades the following day. So that would have been on Wednesday, this past Wednesday, for a week rotation. And yeah, they really needed water. I don't know if you have caught those news stories about the low water pressure and some of the issues they've been having with water supply. And it's not even that they're dry. I mean, what actually happened, and I know there's a lot of controversy about this, but what happens is when you have so many engines pumping at the same time, especially if you're working in the hills, especially those upper hydrants, they're not going to have any pressure, right? So bringing in water to supplement and having more water tenders is what that was the immediate need on Wednesday, was to get more water to the Palisades area, and we're talking about like actual Pacific Palisades area, and then all that entire section along the PCH heading towards Malibu, which at the time when we arrived was still actively on fire. Um, so yeah, that's how we got there. We drove down from Lone Pine, which is kind of in between. It's on the way. It's on Highway 395 on the way to Mammoth Ski Resort. For people that don't know, and but it's kind of like right in the middle between Death Valley National Park, Sequoia Kings Canyon National Park, and Yosemite, and we are dead center in between those, right? So it was about a 3.5 hour drive down to Los Angeles.
So what were your initial impressions when you got there?
Chaos. um, Fortunately, they already had the incident command post set up on Zuma Beach. That's the entire beach was sequestered for this purpose, and they had a lot of resources there already. They had a lot of organization already. But as soon as you would get out of the command center, um, as a new unit coming into these fires, there's always a delay in getting issued orders. We racked out for the night. We arrived at like 10 p.m. at night. This was what's called an immediate need resource. And sometimes they'll send you directly to the fire line. But I think that considering the chaos in the area and how many changes in orders were occurring at the time, they decided just like, you guys get to camp and get some rest, and we'll put you on in the morning, which is what happened. So we just camped out next to the truck on our cots. Didn't no no A lot of the personnel was asleep at the command center, so there was no checking in at that exact time, because it's pretty late. 10 o'clock's pretty late coming in. But so we did that and then got started in the morning.
Yeah, yeah, I'm sure that's a much better way to go, right? I mean, and you
Yeah.
guys are used to sleeping under pressure, which is something that a lot of us don't, that isn't a necessity of most people's jobs. uh,
Right.
right?
Oh yeah, no, it's and then try to sleep when you're so it's a lot of adrenaline. You're going down to an active fire. Yeah.
Yeah, so that adrenaline must keep up the whole time that you're fighting a
It
fire. So
it
what's your process of like when you do that professionally, do you like develop an ability to get calm quicker than other people would, or like how does that work physiologically?
I mean, personally, I mean, everybody's a little bit different. Personally, as captain of the unit, I try to slow everything down. So I try to go through my like mental checklist for things that need to be done, and just very methodically go down that list and check those boxes. And that last box is get to bed. You know what I mean? So I make sure I've done everything, because the worst thing you can do is in that type of situation is lay down and you haven't already gone through that, and then every single thing that could, that could pop into your brain is going to pop into your brain. You're going to get back up and do that. So that's what that's what I did on this one, especially, is I just created a mental checklist to get as prepared as I could. And of course, you never capture everything, but at the very least you go to bed with the illusion that you've gone through everything. You know what I mean? Yeah, when we first got there, it seemed like the immediate need. So that the next morning, so that would have been Thursday morning, we were assigned to a division along the coast, just right at Palisades proper, like where the majority of the the initial push by that fire, it decimated that community, right? Um, Thus the name Palisades Fire. But it was, the path of destruction was alarming. I mean, I have not seen anything of that scale ever on any fire. And we respond to some pretty big fires all over the state. So, but yeah, so initially we were put in a division that was located in that area because that was an area where they really needed a lot of water, and at that point they were trying to defend the buildings that were left, and obviously to put out anything that had burned over but was still smoldering or on fire, and picking up hot spots and just making sure they were keeping it from sparking back up or spreading in any way to areas that weren't touched. There was a couple islands of houses and other buildings that actually were missed by the fire, so they were trying to protect those. So we were initially put on that, but as the day wore on, with the high winds and the fact that the fire itself was starting to spread inland, um, just with wind conditions and how they work in the canyons is pretty difficult to gauge, and it's not an exact science, and it really depends on the terrain. So we were, even though the early morning we were in Palisades area, we were quickly reassigned to attach to units that were way further inland in the canyons, um, who needed water for their pumping platforms because they were cutting fire line. So we were reassigned, and we ended up. So we started the morning with one division, and then ended up with a completely different division by the early afternoon, on a completely different section of fire. So that's kind of how you get moved around as you're needed. They really, Cal Fire really does a lot of getting the assets, getting the resources where they need them. They don't want a lot of downtime or a lot of delay in that. So they're going to put you where they have requests for that type of resource. So they pretty quickly got us into the thick of it for that. Yeah. If you look on a terrain map, if you go to Google or whatever Avenza, click over to the actual terrain and elevation maps, because that'll give you a really good clear view of the types of challenges we have. So these ridges, just a little background, in this area there are fire roads along the ridge tops in most regions, in most areas. They're not always really wide, and they're not always really well maintained, as we found out later, but they are there. So that those are basically areas where they're arteries that you can get resources into areas, and then you can either work down, or there's usually also roads in the canyons where you can work up. So I'm not exactly sure what the game plan was in the Topanga area, but at least they had that main artery of Topanga Canyon Road, right? um, to get resources in and out. Whereas some of the other parts of the fire didn't necessarily have that type of access. So we just had to kind of wing it and try to get where we could on dirt roads, and that can be a lot more difficult, especially because my water tender is a type 1, so it's a 3,000 gallon, um, basically a structure water tender. It's designed for staying on road. So a type 2 would be something that was more designed for like dirt roads and wildland. But we have the advantage of having a bigger tank, right? Than most, not all, but than most, right? So
I've been seeing footage of this like flame retardant chemical being dropped. I'm assuming that's what it is.
yeah.
It's red, like billowing red. Can you talk a little bit about that and its efficacy?
Yeah, so I mean, and that can be used in a lot of different ways. I have been on a lot of wildland fires, especially up in our like more close to our district where we have like a couple air resources that are kind of working throughout the day. On this one, especially, I would say, I guess that would have been Friday. The air operations really ratcheted up. So at the initial part, they had that plane that was scooping out of the ocean. That guy was amazing. I've lots of videos of that guy because we were staging at that point, so I was able to actually have time to film those pickups. But yeah, the fire retardant, the pink stuff that you're seeing, everybody sees that neon pink. So what that does is they can prep an area and create a fire line, like a basically an area that's pretty relatively resistant to burning up way ahead of time, right? But you can also drop it along like ridge lines or to protect roads. A lot of times you'll see engines that have been hit by that and crews that have been hit by that, especially ground crews. But usually when I see those, and I've been in a couple myself, not on this fire but on others, when you see firefighters that are hit with that, that means they were really close to the head of that fire and they basically had a drop pretty much right on them, or somebody made a terrible error. So, but I don't think I've ever seen more efficient air resources. I mean, they were coming in lines, and actually, I'll speak to one that because I was sitting up there watching it happen, and that would have been on Friday. Is they were basically marking a line along Mulholland Drive, so you know where the hiking trails are off Mulholland, like above
Yeah.
Encino. Yeah,
Mhm.
so that area they were just creating a massive line of retardant. And what that's going to do is create basically an anchor point where they know that beyond that they can stage and fight. You know what I mean? So it's like it can be a backup plan. There's a lot of different ways they use those types of resources and that retardant, but generally it just suppresses it doesn't burn. If you put that on if you coat the entire hillside in that, it's not very likely to burn. So
Wow.
that's the idea there. You know
Right.
what I mean? And
Yeah.
then with other drops with just water, what you see in a lot of helicopters,
Mhm.
that with those they're going direct and they're just trying to knock down like different areas or maybe create some space, a buffer area where a fire might try to get up and then they hit the head of it to knock it down, cool it off. But retardant is more like proactive in creating an indirect area or funneling a fire where they want it to go so they can kill it.
Yeah.
Basically, if you have a situation where you have a lot of fuel, and in this instance the fuel is really dry, it's overgrown. I mean, I don't know the accuracy of this, but I mean, I had heard that some of these areas had not ever had not burned in 60 years. So you're talking about a lot of overgrowth, right? And,
Wow.
and then you had that 10 to 15% humidity. This is prime, and then the high winds, obviously, and the variable winds that were actually shifting too. So you have prime, fire risk in those conditions. So yeah, getting that moisture up there, you're robbing fire of one thing that it really needs is like dry fuel, right? So if you're doing that, that you're kicking out one of the legs of what fire needs to sustain itself because you can't stop the airflow, you're not going to be able to stop the wind, you're not going to be able to to eliminate the fuel, but what you can do is add water to an area that is starting to catch or that is actively burning, and that's gonna rob it of heat, so that's gonna slow down the combustion, right?
It's being said that the Palisades had actually stopped raking and clearing the dry brush, and that they'd actually created like a policy like leave it, which I think was supposed to counteract the potential of a mudslide by leaving the roots. And when you rake, you do pull some roots out, and that can
Yeah.
you know, but there's got to be a way to finesse it and communicate that without just like like this black and white kind of approach. Can you speak to that at all? I mean, I'm just imagining that. I know you guys are and I don't want to take up too much more of your time. I know you guys are super busy actually in there fighting the fire, so you probably don't, there's probably not a lot of talk, but at the same time, like, you're hearing stuff, right? Like you guys are kind and you're and witnessing things, right? Like, um
Yeah.
there must be a lot of talk about how this could have been handled better and like what, could be done in the future, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah. I can speak to only what I know about it, and I've obviously caught wind of some things. And the first thing I want to say is like it was, I guess, the day before yesterday was the first day that I've even had time to step away from operations enough to actually see what was being said about the incident and the public reaction to it outside of like actually running into people on the street, which is a whole thing in itself, which is amazing.
mhm.
I could, and by the way, don't worry about time. I'm beyond tired at this point, so it really doesn't matter to me how long we go. But so, I mean, so I can't speak to like the specifics of the Palisades area and how their policies may or may not have influenced the amounts of fuel and locations of fuel that this fire had. But what I can speak to is just the general viewpoint of a lot of this stuff. So, because this gets talked about a lot, like basically management of these areas as preventative measures, versus, versus other like environmental concerns and things like that. So this is something that does come up a lot, and obviously in California we have a lot of environmental protections and different types of regulations that a lot of states don't have, right? And I know a lot of people generally throw a lot of blame around and say, well, if we didn't have those regulations, we'd be able to cut all that brush down and stuff. But you actually nailed it right there. You can do that, but then you're dealing with, like, if you go back to 2023 and we had those atmospheric rivers, those, when you take the brush completely out, especially after a fire, obviously, um, you're going to lose stability of the hill. So you are prone to flooding. You're also prone to mudslides, landslides in general. So there's a lot of considerations, and there's no like easy answer. I mean, and this is just my opinion on this. There's so much misinformation today, and so many so-called experts that just don't, they don't have the expertise to speak on what they're talking about, but they have these platforms where they can talk about all this stuff and people go, well, that makes sense, without understanding the complexity of those issues. So, I mean, yeah, it's an argument that's going to be going on for a long time until there's a like a way that we can find a balance to actually improve the safety of these areas and clearing brush and having defensible space, because that's really important in those hills. And anybody that's been in the hills anywhere, even north of Brentwood, knows how dense that is, right? It's beautiful when you're hiking. I mean, it's great. But for fire operations, it's extremely dangerous. So, and when you have these types of winds, I mean, it's insane. So
When plants are there and there's holes and it's like perforated or aerated, the water can go and seep through. But not only like our streets covered and the water isn't being absorbed into the ground anywhere. Like in LA, there's so much flooding because of all the cement and all the concrete everywhere. Um, but then in the hills, I think the mudslides can happen because there's not like very sandy soil or very high desert chaparral type mountainous areas like at the beach there. It's
right.
really different than a mulchy forest that like
Yeah.
actually pulls the water in, right?
Oh, 100%. 100%. Yeah. You said it best right there. Like, yes, absolutely.
Right.
And every region is going to have unique properties that are have dealt with. I mean, in the Eastern Sierra, for instance, like we have a
Mhm.
relatively dry climate because we sit in the rain shadow of the Sierras, right? And
Mhm.
in Lone Pine, that's the high Sierra range right outside of Lone Pine. So we don't get the rain. So on our side, it's pinyon pine and sagebrush and other, like, sagebrush is actually relatively moist, but as you get further down, you have these much drier types of desert shrubbery, and yeah, if something hits that, it goes.
And
So
also, the volatile oils are flammable, right? Because
right,
there's something about the dry herbs that actually contain a lot of oils, which I think
yeah.
might contribute to that too. This is
Oh,
strange
oh
to
yeah.
think about, like, because we think of these dry areas, but there's oil in these plants.
100%.
Yeah.
Creosote comes to mind when you were saying that. Like creosote bushes, that's a pretty oily wood. You know what I mean? Like the actual branches of it, and it's in lower areas usually. But
Mhm.
like in our, I'm just speaking here from our region,
Right.
because I don't know what it's like in other areas, but yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and and fire is natural, right? It's natural. It's these interface areas. If a system is just doing its thing and people are not around managing anything, it's fine, right? What we're
Right.
talking about is like recreational areas, and you're talking about urban interface areas, where you have a lot of management of specific things and no management of other things. So I think, and like once again, these are just my opinions, but I think that there's a like you could almost do like decades of studies on this, and I'm sure that they exist, and still there would be differences in opinions on region, by region, on what the best policies are for this kind of stuff. But I mean, after a disaster of this scale, I think that's going to be a really long process of trying to figure out how they could have prevented this from blowing up the way they did. But the one thing I would say is the wind, and the videos that I saw from some of the other crews that were there, before we were actually on the ground. The winds were pretty bad when we were there, but what they were facing before that, there was no way they were going to be able to stop that. It's not possible in 80-mile-an-hour winds. Those are hurricane force winds. Um, they're lucky, and it speaks, I think, to their command, um, in those early hours of the fire, that they didn't lose engines and personnel right out the gate. It's incredible to me, because when I started seeing you see the news videos and whatever, and I don't pay attention to that, but when I started seeing like actual stuff from the fire line, I'm like, wow, this was intense. So in a lot of ways, we did not really participate in that part, but we did get a taste of it, on Friday night when we lost our lines. So we did get a taste of what they were experiencing, and it was scary. It was really scary.
There's kind of a conspiracy that I see going around on the internet a lot, which is people look at these aerial shots of where there have been fires. This has happened all over California, maybe in other locations too. And people comment on how houses seem to be targeted and how trees remain like somewhat, intact, and they'll bounce back. Vinyl siding is a big trend. It's highly flammable.
Right, right.
So my guess is that a lot of these newer communities, or communities where everybody's keeping up with their neighbors, they've replaced everything with vinyl. Do you have
I
any?
oh I couldn't agree more. And actually, when these areas do open back up for the public to move into them, especially along, PCH, you can see this. If you have a chance to drive through that area after they open it back up, obviously it's completely evacuated right now because we have to move our apparatus through there, and National Guard is actually blocking that. So don't head down there now. But um, when you do, pay attention to how many of the buildings that survived were either concrete or stucco. They tended to do much better. The newer, lighter construction, especially, like the really decorative, like, like they're made to look. They're really modern looking, but it's like a condo kind of style, stacked style along the coast there. Those are gone, all of them. Like the
Yeah.
the lighter construction is gone. It's the heavier construction that stayed. Um, like especially the, cinder block and things like that. Not all of them, obviously, because there's a lot of factors that go into that. But yeah, I'd say you're right. And this is not just in California. I mean, when you have Wall Street controlling construction, you're going to get cheaply built houses. Also, there's another thing too, is that those and I'm sure there's arborists who can speak to this all day long, outside of what I can do. But if you can just see it in older construction on houses, you can look at the wood grain on a 2x4, and an older 2x4 is heavy and dense and hard, and heavy, dense wood requires more heat to burn, to even start it to ignite. if you go to Home Depot, go look at the pine and it's twisting and it's doing that. The rings are far apart. That is not a natural pine. You're getting a genetically modified tree that grows really fast, but it
Mm.
doesn't have the density or the strength of its actual of that species of tree. So, and like I said, maybe that's a great conversation to have with an arborist who can explain the whole history of that. But I mean, you can see it just in the wood grain of older buildings.
Like,
So
are there things that we could just do in the future to, like, if everybody had to have a sprinkler system on top of their roof in Southern California, would that be beneficial? Are there things that could be done? Like,
I mean, yeah, suppression systems are good, and you'll find those a lot on I guess they would be like higher value properties. We'll put those in, and maybe I'm not sure about the ordinances down here, but they are slowly becoming requirements. I know up in our area, you have to have a certain type of suppression system. Ours are internal inside the homes for new builds, but not external. But yeah, that can absolutely help, because what you're talking about is exposure, right? You're talking about heat, radiant heat specifically, but then you're also talking about embers. Well, water is going to put embers out real fast, but it's also going to provide a barrier between the radiant heat from the building across the street or next to you. Because like when you're talking about houses in close proximity to each other, when one catches, and a lot of people don't think about this, they're only thinking about the embers. And yeah, of course, embers are can start fires really easily, but so can radiant heat. And
mm,
if you had sprinkler systems running on a a few neighbors' houses, they would be more likely to they'd be harder to catch because they would cool those buildings off. So we do that all the time in structure. And our by the way, we're talking a lot about wildland fire here, but our structure protection district, we are a structure company, right? So, that's like in our area, we protect the structures. If it's outside of our town, it's CAL FIRE, a lot of it, right? It's like state run. But so yeah, but a lot of what we do when we respond to a structure fire, we're going to watch the buildings around it and we're going to keep them cool. So yes, of course, if they instituted that, it would absolutely help the spread of fires like this. But there's a downside to that I'll caution, because this just came up. I actually was speaking to a lieutenant yesterday about this, and once again, I wasn't there, but he was talking about in Palisades, they had a bunch of houses that had those suppression systems, but some of them were, because the winds were so intense, they didn't help, because if it's a sprinkler and the wind is so heavy that the water just gets thrown at 80-mile-an-hour wind, you're not going to get a steady stream. And in fact, people were shooting off of like a big cannon basically off their rig, and the water was just making a like complete right hand turn and going away from the building, right? The wind's too high, so a sprinkler's not even going to make a dent in that kind of wind. But so what had happened is a few of those houses that did have those systems that had burned, those water pipes then ruptured, and those were bleeding off pressure from the system, exacerbating the problem with the low pressure,
oh, wow.
because they have now a running faucet
Right.
that's taking away pressure. And that's a whole nother thing, is if you have hundreds or thousands of those going off at the same time, yes, it could be beneficial, or it could lower your water pressure all the way. And another thing too, and I meant to mention this earlier, is when you have these really hilly areas and you have the hydrant systems,
Mhm.
um, a lot of pumps are electric, and if you have the power go down, you don't have that assistance anymore in those areas. So now you're running on whatever they can get from the engine or from the water tender, right? So they're going to try to draft as much water as they can, but without the assistance from those pumps to push it up the hill, you know what I mean? You might have trouble, especially in the higher elevations. So
Well, thank you so much for being with us today. I really appreciate it. Any final thoughts? And is there any way that folks can support your unit, or like bring things to the main headquarters at camp at Zuma, or where can people contribute?
Oh yeah. Okay. So
And what can they contribute? And yeah,
yeah, yeah, that's a really good question. So I think that the programs that have been the most successful are nonprofits that are actually running these. But private donations are being accepted. At least I don't have any information that has changed this, but you're like your local LA Fire Department, they've been sharing that kind of stuff. Your local stations, they have been sharing that with out of state or out of area resources. So
yeah,
and they have also been sending it up the pipe to the coast when they get a lot. So definitely your local station, go meet your local station, go meet the members, go those guys live there. Remember that. They're your guys for your neighborhood. And it's a great way to also get to know them and them to get to know you, tell them where you live, like what street, you really like it builds community, you know what I mean? So that's what I would recommend for donations. As for like what to donate, um, obviously like different types of beverages are always good, but we do get from camp we do get a lot of Gatorade and a lot of bottled water and things like that because we're on 24-hour shifts, a lot of us, not everybody but a lot of us, so we get enough for the whole night, you know what I mean, and the whole morning, right? Um, so that sometimes like we usually we don't go through that many depending on how big the crew is for that particular apparatus, but um one thing that I will always advocate for is creature comforts. Like think about you're on a fire line, you're sweating, you're working, and there's no shower, there's no bathrooms, there's no just think about what you would want in that situation, right? One of the things like they have I think they're called like hero pads or something. They're a specific type of like wet wipe. They come in a red thing. I wish I had one with me so I could show you. But anyway, they also remove lead from your skin. You can probably look them up on Google. Those types of things are awesome. Wet naps that we can clean our faces, clean around our eyes are great. Obviously, eye drops for people that are on the actual fire lines are really good. But anything that makes us feel human again, socks, clean socks, amazing. Bundles of socks, but all kinds of stuff, useful tools. I personally like when people bring glow sticks because we can mark things for the night ops. Like I can be like, this hydrant is good. I'm gonna put a glow stick on it. So basically things like that, like things outside the box, not just, I mean, snacks are great, and if they're very specific, like if they're protein shake, like those little protein drinks, those are popular. You know what I mean? Things like that, things that you're not going to necessarily get from camp. If you ever want to bring me back, I'm going to rotate off the line and for a week of rest, and then I might, if I'm sure it's probably still going to go, I'll probably rotate back on. And I was going to say one other thing about
yeah,
evacuations
yeah.
for those of you who are in Los Angeles, when it's a high wind situation, and everybody knows when the Santa Anas are kicking in, which they are right now. If you get that warning and if it jumps up to that level 2, leave. Like, do not wait till the last minute to move, especially if you have, young children or animals that you have to get out of there, or elderly people, anybody with disabilities, get out. Like, just go. I mean, even sitting in a parking lot in a safe place and waiting to see what happens is better than trying to rush out of a house and then hitting traffic as everybody's panicking at the same time, right? So take those warnings very seriously. And also, if you're not getting on those apps, sometimes they don't update correctly. If they're not updated, or if you notice they just haven't sent an update in a while, you might have some service issues. It could also be the app. Go on to LA Fire, go on to Cal Fire's website. Those will be up to date. There are people who are dedicated to just doing that. So listen to these warnings. Stay safe. Stay out of the fire's way. You know what I mean? And that's basically what I wanted to say. So
Awesome. Well, very, very helpful. Very helpful. Thank you so much. I'm going to try this again. Captain Ash Seiter.